What is the price of playing a game? You might rightfully say the price set by the publisher or developer. Another person may also suggest the fee of the platform, such as a computer or a console. And indeed, most of the time you have to pay money to play a game. But in reality, there's more to it than just the monetary aspect. For instance, the player's time. That's another cost, but with a twist on it. I'll talk about that later in this video. These other costs are important because they impact how players experience a game. Example, requiring quick reflexes might be too much for some people, which reduces how accessible the game is to casual players. Whoops! So, what can we do about it? As designers, we can carefully craft games around these costs. We can try to adjust some to players, perhaps reduce others as much as possible. And I think we can even go a step further by cleverly compensating them with rewards to cushion their perceived loss. But before going that far, we have to get to know the other essential non-monetary costs of a game. So, which are these? A few weeks ago, my dad started playing the classic real-time strategy game Age of Empires 3, though the definitive edition. This was happening after years of not playing an RTS. So, he jumped into a single-player campaign, started playing around with the units, and, after a short while, out of the blue, he quit. I mean, come on. I know my father isn't some elite player, but I also know he's curious enough to insist a little bit more. At that moment, I didn't quite understand why. He went through all that trouble of installing the game, so why not play it? But after thinking about it for a few days, it clicked. Relearning was maybe too much time and patience consuming, which drove him to postpone his play. Or, in simpler words, the effort he had to put in to enjoy the game was too much. And this is, actually, the first major cost of playing. The effort or energy that you spend to learn the moves of an annoying boss in Cuphead, to reach and light the next bonfire in Dark Souls, or what you put into outsmarting your opponent to destroy their civilization in Age of Empires. You can also split effort into physical effort, like swift reflexes or good eye-hand coordination, and mental effort, such as predicting your opponent's next move or counting cards in the enemy's deck. In Characteristics of Games, Scuff Elias, Robert Gushera, and Richard Garfield suggest that there are Twitch games with Twitch skills, like Quake, non-Twitch games, mostly based on thinking, like Civilization, and the combinations of those attributes. By that logic, there are players who are quick with reacting to others, people that prefer taking their time with choosing the correct move, and there are also those who can manage in both cases. Besides games that require a considerable amount of energy, there are also games that fall onto the other side of the spectrum that need little to no effort. You can think of this whole concept in terms of a pressure gauge. If there's too little pressure from the game, playing might be boring and uninteresting. But if there's too much, players may become annoyed and frustrated, in both cases risking losing them. And if you consider the flow theory, it makes sense to want to challenge players just the right amount. Flow also tells us that as players get better, the game's difficulty has to increase, and therefore the effort. This means player tolerance changes as the game progresses. With that in mind, a pitfall you must avoid is expecting the curve to look something like this. An early, steep rise, requiring huge amounts of effort before players had any chance of getting to know the game. George Fan, designer of Plants vs. Zombies, explains that it's important to gradually increase the effort cost as players become more interested in the game. Competitive multiplayer games make for an interesting case. Fighting against casual players makes it easy to catch up to their level and enjoy playing, but constantly being paired with much better opponents is atrocious. Thus, because each player is different and therefore better or worse at the game, the effort cost is set by the players. This is what designers call skill floor. Games with low skill floors are easy to get a grip on, while having high entry points can make it exceptionally hard for beginners to play. This usually leads to spiraling costs. New players stop playing, so the previously mediocre ones are now considered new, which increases the skill disparity, making it even harder for newbies to enjoy their time. Okay, here's another story. When I started playing Yakuza 0, I found it dull. Don't get me wrong, fighting as a Yakuza member is far from boring, but I couldn't bear the way the game starts with a 10-minute long cutscene. Although there is nothing inherently wrong with cutscenes, for the first 10 minutes of the game I had almost no agency, something for which I wasn't prepared. This brings us to the second type of cost, time. As I mentioned in the beginning, time is a tricky one. Players don't mind spending their time playing games. After all, the act of playing is voluntary, and it's up to the players to quit whenever they want. What's up with time then? Well, it's about respecting the player's time and understanding that games should empower its players with agency. Yakuza didn't do that for me. But what it did is known as downtime, which is when you're not actively playing or interacting with the game in any way. For instance, downtime is when you're waiting for your opponent's move in Hearthstone, or for your turn to roll the die in Mario Party. Downtime can also exponentially grow, leading to the ridiculous situation where you wait more than you actually play. In conclusion, downtime must be entirely bad, right? Not quite. One perk would be that, in turn-based games, while waiting for everyone to finish, you have enough time to analyze the board and think of what to do next. But, more importantly, downtime allows for pacing your game and giving players a break. So, in a game like Uncharted 4, after a long action-packed sequence, you're rewarded with a cutscene that reveals more of the game's narrative. And on the other hand, we have Doom with very little downtime, and that quickly gets exhausting. So, how can we approach reducing these costs, or at the very least, make players perceive them as less than they actually are? Well, you could add randomness and luck into the game's design. This way, low-skill players would have a chance of beating better players, reducing both the effort and time necessary to reach a point where the game is reasonable. Another way to help low-skilled players is by creating negative feedback loops. These essentially make it hard to get too ahead, but also keep players from falling too far behind. So, in all-time classic example Mario Kart, the worse you're doing, the more chances you have of earning game-changing power-ups that can boost you to the first places, all the while the winning players get abilities of little use. Though if you don't like the idea of luck in your game, there's another way to reduce effort and to make the game fairer. If you're always put up against worse players, the game becomes boring and not worthwhile. And if everyone is better than you, then it will be frustrating. The solution? Engineer better skill-based matchmaking systems. By this I mean that players should be paired up with similar people in terms of skill. How to create a good matchmaking system is way over my head, so I left some links about that below this video. For single-player games, there are plenty of ways to reduce effort and make them more accessible. To name a few, you could let players change the difficulty if they want a more casual experience. Or perhaps you could go out of your way to create a dynamic difficulty system so players don't feel pressured to play on a certain setting. Another way to help your players is by implementing assist modes. These not only make it easier to get past hard sections of a game, but also make it more accessible to people with disabilities. But instead of reducing these costs, we can go a step further and take a completely different approach by cleverly rewarding players for their effort and time. One research found that when players are rewarded, their effort, as well as enjoyment and engagement, increases. Thus, After a long and arduous quest, it might be a good idea to reward the player with a shiny, powerful sword. Or, as I mentioned before, an interesting cutscene after a stressful fighting sequence might be the perfect reward, in addition to being a well-deserved breather. Lastly, here's a caveat. Your game might not be able to accommodate these cost-reducing methods. Deciding whether to add luck to a competitive game can put you in a tricky position due to its nature, and perhaps creating negative feedback loops would make the game really unfair for the elite players, basing winning too much on luck. In turn, you should carefully think about the experience you're trying to deliver, and if any of these are worth adding. It's probably clear, but still worth mentioning. This video is very subjective, so you may or may not agree with some of the examples I suggested. If you want to learn more about this topic, check out the description and look for the further reading section. And while you're there, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for others just like this one, and maybe leave a comment to tell me what you enjoyed. Or if you're in for an adventure, join us over on Patreon like these heroes: Avirama FM, Badr Al-Kahtani, Giovanni Pena, Golden Glowmaster, Rahul Mahipal, Realitas Verlast, and Waifu is Laifu. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers!